Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. There's one person in all this I do feel a very small degree of sympathy for briefly, and that is Theresa May. I have a quotation from 2,400 years ago from Sophocles, which I think is especially for her. The keenest sorrow is to recognise themselves as the sole cause of all their adversities. And of course I say that because in choosing at the outset to give away one of the most important negotiating tools she had at her disposal before getting anything in return, invoking Article 50, giving away time. It's the one thing we all get equal amounts of, and when you give away time, you give away the debate. There are some other interesting quotations, and I think I want to spend a little time talking about fishing, of course, and about how that is dealt with in many of the documents. The First Minister referred to the American negotiating document, and I'll come back to that in a minute or two. But in any negotiation where you end up with a printed document, it's as well to remember what Tom Witt said, "The large print giveth, but the small print taketh away." Now, in large print terms, fishing figured in Theresa May's speech at the Mansion House in January 2017. There was a single mention of fishing in a very substantial speech, and that single mention said that we should, in essence, deliver equity in fishing to foreign countries. Not a single word about a fisherman in the UK, Scottish, English, Welsh, Irish, not a single word, only about the foreigners. She realised her mistake, and in Florence, she said there should be equity between our fishermen and the fishermen of other countries. In other words, she's teeing us up for selling our fishermen out again. Today, we've got practical problems. We're now in the small print. We need export health certificates if we're going to land fish from Scotland in other countries. Now, how is a vessel fishing off Greenland coming to decide where it's going to land in Norway, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Scotland, in England, because they make these decisions while at sea, when they don't have the certificate that enables them to make that choice? It's a cost, but it also is a delay, and it costs time. Now, let's have a look at some other small print that there is in the American negotiating document. And let me just read one paragraph. It happens to be under sanitary and psychosanitary measures. Includes strong provisions for transparency and public consultation that require the UK, this is the Americans saying this, to publish drafts of regulations, allows stakeholders in other countries to comment on those drafts, and require authorities to address significant issues raised by these stakeholders and explain how the final measure achieves the stated objectives. In other words, other countries have to sign off. And this is repeated under technical barriers to trade, where essentially the same thing is also said. It's quite clear that if the UK thinks it's getting independence, if you're to look at the last big country with whom we might wish to have a trade deal, their negotiating terms, it tells us exactly they want to control the way in which the UK operates in that regard. And of course, we've nothing much to give. And think about the NHS and the role there. Under trade in services, the negotiating terms say apply to all service sectors. Discrimination against foreign suppliers, not allowed. Retain flexibility for US non-conforming measures. In other words, they're allowed to not conform to the measures, but the UK must. And under state-owned and controlled enterprises, and that would be the NHS, ensure SOEs act in accordance with commercial considerations with respect to the purchase of goods and services. In other words, you can't run it simply without opening up to commercial competition. That's what the Americans want. It's been a long-term issue between the United States and the European Union about the privacy and use of data that is collected in the UK. Well, under financial services, the negotiating document says commitments to ensure the UK refrains from imposing measures that restrict cross-border data flows. In other words, our data should be able to be lifted from the UK and taken to the regime in the United States where personal data is not protected in the way that we are used to, expect and require. And in agricultural goods, non-tariff barriers against US agricultural goods must go. In other words, we must accept chlorinated chicken. We must accept hormone-treated beef. It's all in there. And here's another one, and this is a real cracker. Under Labour, require the UK to ensure that foreign workers are protected under labour laws. Not in the US, that doesn't really matter. They can keep people out as long as they want to. Now, let me just come back as I reach for the end of my contribution, presiding officer, and look at the small print that goes with the agreement, because the afternoon's all been about the agreement, and very little discussion about the political agreement. And of course, for the fishing industry, paragraph 75, which reads, within the context of the overall economic partnership of the parties. Let me say it again. Within the context of an overall economic partnership, establish a new fisheries agreement inter alia on access to waters and quota shares. In other words, we don't get the sea of opportunity that we've been promised. We don't get to get control over our fishing waters in our own rights. Let me just conclude, presiding officer, with a quote from another age of great difficulties, 1862, the American Civil War. I'm currently reading the latest biography of Frederick Douglass, who visited Scotland in 1843, interesting enough, an ex-slave. And he wrote, and this is, I think, something we should direct to our Conservative friends, and I have Conservative friends. He is the best friend of this country, who at this tremendous crisis dares to tell his countrymen the truth. It's time the Tories started talking the truth to themselves and not spreading falsehoods about others.